says that the interest rate on a country, I, is equal to some sort of real fundamental interest rate, R, plus inflation, denoted here as pi. This inflation is expected inflation because it's not inflation that you see today, but it's what inflation is expected over, let's say, the next 6 to 12 months. So the interest rate, like the interest rate that you see in a country, is equal to whatever inflation is expected to be in that country, because at least the interest rate should cover, the weakening of that country's currency, inflation over time, plus some sort of fundamental interest rate, or real interest rate. You can use the International Fisher effect in practice to calculate the expected spot rate between two countries. For example, suppose we were going to look at the expected spot rate, the exchange rate that we expect in the future between the Norwegian kroner and the US dollar. Under the Fisher effect hypothesis, the expected spot rate, that would just be equal to what the spot rate is today, multiplied by this inflation differential. That is, for the Norwegian kroner versus the USD, the inflation differential between inflation in Norway and inflation in the United States. Notice that if we're looking at the spot rate in terms of kroner versus USD, then we just have to make sure our inflation figure here is consistent. It's kroner divided by USD. So if we had a current spot rate for the kroner versus USD today of 8.55 Norwegian kroner for every US dollar, then the only remaining thing we need to do is to calculate or find the inflation rate, expected inflation rate for Norway and that for the United States. If, for example, over the next year, inflation in the United States is going to be, or expected to be, 2.4% over the year, and for Norway, it's expected to be only 1% over the next year, we can use these two figures and the exchange rate today to figure out what the expected spot rate will be 1 year from now. Since we're looking at 1 year inflation, we can use that to forecast 1 year future exchange rates. If we simplify this number here, what we get is 0.986, and then multiply that by the current exchange rate. That gives us an expected spot rate 1 year from now for the Norwegian kroner of 8.43 kroner to the USD. And if you make the comparison here of the value of the kroner in 1 year versus where it's at today, you'll see that the kroner becomes stronger, or is expected to become stronger 1 year from now. That's because 1 USD buys fewer kroner, or is expected to, in a year. And that makes sense because here, if you look at the inflation differential, the US is expected to have higher inflation versus that of Norway. Higher inflation means a weaker currency. And that's what's being reflected here through this Fisher effect, is an expectation of a weaker currency for the USD, this currency which is expected to have higher inflation.